"Let us hear the history," said Franz, motioning Signor Pastrini to seat himself. "Your Excellencies permit it?" asked the host. "Pardieu!" cried Albert, "you are not a preacher, to remain standing." The host sat down, after having made each of them a respectful bow, which meant that he was ready to tell them all they wished to know concerning Luigi Vampa. "You tell me," said Franz, at the moment Signor Pastrini was about to open his mouth, "that you knew Luigi Vampa when he was a child. He is still a young man, then?" "A young man? He is only 22. He will gain himself a reputation." "What do you think of that, Albert? At 22 to be thus famous?" "Yes, and at his age, Alexander, Caesar, and Napoleon, who have all made some noise in the world, were quite behind him." "So," continued Franz, "the hero of this history is only 22? "Scarcely so much." "Is he tall or short?" "Of the middle height, about the same stature as His Excellency," returned the host, pointing to Albert. "Thanks for the comparison," said Albert, with a bow. "Go on, Signor Pastrini," continued Franz, smiling at his friend's susceptibility. "To what class of society does he belong?" "He was a shepherd boy attached to the farm of the Count of San Felice, situated between Palestrina and the Lake of Gabri. He was born at Pomponara, and entered the Count's service when he was 5 years old. His father was also a shepherd, who owned a small flock, and lived by the wool and the milk, which he sold at Rome." When quite a child, the little Vampa displayed a most extraordinary precocity. One day, when he was 7 years old, he came to the curate of Palestrina, and asked to be taught to read. It was somewhat difficult, for he could not quit his flock, but the good curate went every day to say mass at a little hamlet too poor to pay a priest, and which, having no other name, was called Borgo. He told Luigi that he might meet him on his return, and that then he would give him a lesson, warning him that it would be short, and that he must profit as much as possible by it. The child accepted joyfully. Every day Luigi led his flock to graze on the road that leads from Palestrina to Borgo. Every day, at 9 o'clock in the morning, the priest and the boy sat down on a bank by the wayside, and the little shepherd took his lesson out of the priest's breviary. At the end of 3 months he had learned to read. This was not enough, he must now learn to write. The priest had a writing teacher at Rome make 3 alphabets, one large, one middling, and one small, and pointed out to him that by the help of a sharp instrument he could trace the letters on a slate, and thus learn to write. The same evening, when the flock was safe at the farm, the little Luigi hastened to the smith at Palestrina, took a large nail, heated and sharpened it, and formed a sort of stylus. The next morning he gathered an armful of pieces of slate and began. At the end of 3 months he had learned to write. The curate, astonished at his quickness and intelligence, made him a present of pens, paper, and a penknife. This demanded new effort, but nothing compared to the first. At the end of a week he wrote as well with his pen as with the stylus. The curate related the incident to the Count of San Felice, who sent for the little shepherd, made him read and write before him, ordered his attendant to let him eat with the domestics, and to give him 2 piastres a month. With this, Luigi purchased books and pencils. He applied his imitative powers to everything, and, like Giotto, when young, he drew on his slate sheep, houses, and trees. Then, with his knife, he began to carve all sorts of objects in wood. It was thus that Pinelli, the famous sculptor, had commenced. A girl of 6 or 7, that is, a little younger than Vampa, tended sheep on a farm near Palestrina. She was an orphan, born at Valmontone and was named Teresa. The 2 children met, sat down near each other, let their flocks mingle together, played, laughed, and conversed together. In the evening they separated the Count of San Felice's flock from those of Baron Cervetri, and the children returned to their respective farms, promising to meet the next morning. The next day they kept their word, and thus they grew up together. Vampa was 12, and Teresa 11. And yet their natural disposition revealed itself. Beside his taste for the fine arts, which Luigi had carried as far as he could in his solitude, he was given to alternating fits of sadness and enthusiasm, was often angry and capricious, and always sarcastic. None of the lads of Pomponara, Palestrina, or Valmontone had been able to gain any influence over him or even to become his companion. His disposition, always inclined to exact concessions rather than to make them, kept him aloof from all friendships. Teresa alone ruled by a look, a word, a gesture, this impetuous character, which yielded beneath the hand of a woman, and which beneath the hand of a man might have broken, but could never have been bended. Teresa was lively and gay, but coquettish to excess. The 2 piastres that Luigi received every month from the Count of San Felice's steward, and the price of all the little carvings in wood he sold at Rome, were expended in earrings, necklaces, and gold hairpins. So that, thanks to her friend's generosity, Teresa was the most beautiful and the best attired peasant near Rome. The 2 children grew up together, passing all their time with each other, and giving themselves up to the wild ideas of their different characters. Thus, in all their dreams, their wishes, and their conversations, Vampa saw himself the captain of a vessel, general of an army, or governor of a province. Teresa saw herself rich, superbly attired, and attended by a train of liveried domestics. Then, when they had thus passed the day in building castles in the air, they separated their flocks, and descended from the elevation of their dreams to the reality of their humble position. One day the young shepherd told the Count's steward that he had seen a wolf come out of the Sabine mountains, and prowl around his flock. The steward gave him a gun. This was what Vampa longed for. This gun had an excellent barrel, made at Brescia, and carrying a ball with the precision of an English rifle, but one day the Count broke the stock, and had then cast the gun aside. This, however, was nothing to a sculptor like Vampa. He examined the broken stock, calculated what change it would require to adapt the gun to his shoulder, and made a fresh stock, so beautifully carved that it would have fetched 15 or 20 piastres, had he chosen to sell it. But nothing could be farther from his thoughts. For a long time a gun had been the young man's greatest ambition. In every country where independence has taken the place of liberty, the first desire of a manly heart is to possess a weapon, which at once renders him capable of defense or attack, and, by rendering its owner terrible, often makes him feared. From this moment Vampa devoted all his leisure time to perfecting himself in the use of his precious weapon. He purchased powder and ball, and everything served him for a mark, the trunk of some old and moss-grown olive tree, that grew on the Sabine mountains, the fox, as he quitted his earth on some marauding excursion, the eagle that soared above their heads, and thus he soon became so expert, that Teresa overcame the terror she at first felt at the report, and amused herself by watching him direct the ball wherever he pleased, with as much accuracy as if he placed it by hand. One evening a wolf emerged from a pine wood near which they were usually stationed, but the wolf had scarcely advanced 10 yards ere he was dead. Proud of this exploit, Vampa took the dead animal on his shoulders, and carried him to the farm. These exploits had gained Luigi considerable reputation. The man of superior abilities always finds admirers, go where he will. He was spoken of as the most adroit, the strongest, and the most courageous contadino for 10 leagues around, and although Teresa was universally allowed to be the most beautiful girl of the Sabines, no one had ever spoken to her of love, because it was known that she was beloved by Vampa. And yet the two young people had never declared their affection. They had grown together like two trees whose roots are mingled, whose branches intertwined, and whose intermingled perfume rises to the heavens. Only their wish to see each other had become a necessity, and they would have preferred death to a day's separation. Teresa was 16, and Vampa 17. About this time, a band of brigands that had established itself in the Lepani Mountains began to be much spoken of. The brigands have never been really extirpated from the neighborhood of Rome.